darker.
Friday the 13th, The Carnival by Morse. Book number 3 from the Camp Crystal Lake series. Chapter 1. Welcome to the Funhouse. At 10:30 on a warm June morning, a caravan of trucks rumbled through the tiny town of Crystal Lake. The large white trucks followed one after another like a parade of elephants. On the side of each truck was the same faded red and blue lettering. Vince Fantana's Traveling Funhouse and Carnival. And underneath that, printed in script, was the cheerful message, "Yes sirree, folks, here comes the carnival." Sure enough, right behind the trucks came a string of huge mobile homes and trailers. And strapped onto the trailers were the pieces of the amusement rides. Here were the cars for the Tilt-A-Whirl, the rusty metal arms for the Scrambler, the tracks and metal frames for the huge roller coaster known as the Monster. The parts of the rides looked like the broken limbs of giant robots. The truck drivers had been instructed to blast their air horns as they drove through town. But despite the noise, the townspeople of the tiny backwoods village of Crystal Lake didn't come out of their houses to see who was arriving. The drivers didn't even see any curious faces peering out of their windows. Not a good sign, thought Mitch Deaver, who was driving the fifth truck. Lazily, he moved a soggy toothpick from one side of his long, thin slash of a mouth to the other, and back again. Then he looked back down at the girly magazine, which he had spread open across the truck's steering wheel, and he honked the horn again, long and loud. Chief mechanic for the traveling carnival, Mitch was a tall and powerful man in his late 20s. He wore his greasy black hair combed straight up and back. His wide sideburns angled far down his cheeks. Green and red tattoos covered his muscular arms, and he had knifed the sleeves of his t-shirt at the shoulder to show off the artwork. Snakes were his favorite design, their lifelike green bodies coiled and slithered all over the ropes of his thick muscles. But there were also daggers, skulls, hearts, and girls' names. Mitch liked to boast that he had a tattoo for every girl in every town he'd ever made time with. Then he'd point out that they weren't too many blank spots left on his arm. Sitting next to Mitch on the seat was Stump, his large, powerful Rottweiler. Mitch had given the dog his name because he had bobbed the dog's tail himself. The dog was resting his square head on the thigh of Mitch's grimy black work pants. And when Mitch unfolded one of the larger pictures in his magazine, the dog opened one dark brown eye, as if he too were interested in the photo. Mitch cackled and slapped the dog hard on the back. But where the hell were they going? The long lines of trucks were bouncing over dirt roads now, roads that seemed to lead further and further into the dark woods. Mitch cursed. It hadn't been a good year for the carnival. In April, in Jessup, Georgia, a kid had fallen off the Ferris wheel. The operator had been drunk and had forgotten to check that all the passengers' safety bars were latched in place. The girl had broken a leg, and Vince Fantana, the owner, had lost his insurance. Since then, Fantana had to change the carnival's entire schedule. He had to schedule fair dates in more and more remote places where the carnival's reputation wasn't known. But this? The dirt road they were now driving on wasn't much more than a logging trail. Mitch couldn't see through the thick green woods that pressed against the truck on either side. Then he spotted an old wooden sign planted in the overgrown weeds. "Welcome to Camp Crystal Lake," read the carved letters in the dark wood. Somehow the sign didn't make Mitch feel welcome. It seemed more like a grave marker. Mitch spat out the window as they drove by. It was a gloomy, overcast day. The dark sky made everything, even the green trees, look gray. On his left, though, through the trees, Mitch started catching glimpses of a vast lake. Not a soul in sight. No one swimming, fishing, boating, nothing. Mitch couldn't blame the locals for avoiding the place. There was something ugly about that lake. Then the trucks were turning right into a wide open field of overgrown grass and weeds. Trucks were parking. Vince Fantana, that nasty old gopher, was strutting around with his walkie-talkie, barking orders. So this was it. This was the sight. It would be the carny workers' job to turn this godforsaken hellhole into a festive fairgrounds. Mitch jumped down from the cab of the truck and held the door open for Stump. The dog leaped out and bounded around, sniffing and peeing everywhere, marking the place as his own. "Hey, Deaver!" One of the lot supervisors was yelling at him. "Over here!" Mitch stretched, taking his sweet time. He cracked his knuckles, then his back. He bit the end of his toothpick, making the little stick go end over end in his large mouth. Then he spat it into the grass. After all his years in the carnival biz, Mitch knew the fair setup routine by heart. His first job would be setting up the ride they called the House of Death. Chapter 2. Maxie. 30 miles away in the town of Holloway, Massachusetts, 3 girls were walking tightrope style along the narrow curve on Porter Avenue. Porter Avenue was a straight 2-lane blacktop that connected Holloway with Craneville, Hawthorne, Crystal Lake, and other nearby towns. Along this particular stretch of road, anyways, there was nothing much to look at except a few auto body shops and a lot of grass. So the drivers of the passing cars could be forgiven if their heads turned sharply to watch the girls. It was the girl who was leading who caught their eye, Maxie Wagner. Her full name was Maxine, but nobody who knew her even slightly called her that. She was 17 and tall and thin. She had shoulder-length dark hair, large, dark eyes, and long legs that seemed to go all the way up to her head. She moved with the grace of a deer. Maxie's long arms teetered, and she stepped off the curb into the street. A pickup truck was speeding toward them. Maxie stuck out her thumb. As the truck whizzed by, she caught a glimpse of the heavy-set driver, glaring at her with cold, dark eyes. Despite the heat, she shivered. "Are you crazy?" Maxie turned. Her short friend Wendy was glaring at her, hands on wide hips. "What are you sticking out your thumb for? I mean, what if he stops?" "Then we get a ride?" Maxie said. Her voice was low and sultry, that from time to time girls accused her of faking it, just to act sexy. It wasn't true. It was her natural voice. "A ride?" Wendy wailed. "He wasn't even going our way." "So? What's so great about where we're going?" It was Monday morning, the beginning of another dreary week of summer school at Harriet C. Carson Community College. Since they had a long gap between math and English classes, Maxie had insisted that her friends Wendy and Casey go into town with her to get ice cream floats at Woolworth's and shop for makeup. The various pockets of Maxie's white painter pants were now crammed with Maybelline indigo blue eyeliner, strawberry and pink bubblegum lip gloss, cover stick, CoverGirl foundation, black nail polish, and a tube of desert sand blush, none of which she had paid for. Maxie was an only child. Her dad was the president of a small but highly successful computer company. He gave Maxie enough money to buy anything she wanted, but that was no fun. That's why she always shoplifted. Only trouble was she never got caught. That was no fun either. "Wendy's right," Casey said softly. The pretty ash blonde was standing between Maxie and Wendy. Her weight shifted to 1 foot. She was smiling shyly at Maxie. That was one of the many annoying things about Casey, thought Maxie. She smiled even when she was saying something critical. "You shouldn't hitch," Casey said. "I know," agreed Maxie. "That's why I do it so much." She picked up a stick and rapped it against a telephone pole. There was a colorful poster stapled to the pole's dark wood. Maxie glanced at it. "Carnival," she said flatly. She couldn't think of anything less exciting. She started to walk on, but Casey said, "A carnival?" She clapped her hands. "I love carnivals. Hey guys, why don't we go? You want to go?" "Gag me with a spoon," Maxie said. As far as Maxie was concerned, Catherine, Casey Carter, was probably one of the sweetest, most polite girls in the history of the entire world. She wondered why she stayed friends with her. Casey got interested and excited about just about everything. If a killer told Casey he was going to shoot her, she'd probably say, "Cool, is there anything I can do to help?" "When's the fair, Wins?" Casey asked. "Did we miss it?" Wendy leaned forward, fingertips jammed in her jeans front pockets, and studied the poster up close. "Guys," Maxie said, "come on, I'm sweating bullets here." "I just want to know when it is," Casey said, wrinkling her pert nose in an expression Maxie had told her more than once made her look like a gerbil. "When's?" Casey asked again. Wendy was squinting at the poster. Wendy worked out about an hour a day and didn't have an extra ounce of fat on her, but because of her body shape, she still ended up looking like a pear. With her pug nose, big apple cheeks, and the acne on her forehead, Wendy was not what anyone would call a looker. As a result, she was always worried about her appearance, and she refused to wear her glasses. To read, she had to hold things right up to her eyes. "It starts this weekend," she said finally, "complete with fireworks for the 4th of July. "Really? Cool," Casey said. She gave Maxie a questioning grin. "What do you say? A little carnival action?" "The D word," Maxie said. Casey squinted at Maxie. "Delightful," she guessed. "Darling? Delicious?" "Dull," Maxie said. "Come on." "Wait a minute," Wendy said, peering at the poster once more. "Oh, wow, you're right. Forget it." Frowning, she started to walk down the street again. "What's wrong?" Casey asked her. "Nothing." "When's what?" "The carnival's being held in Crystal Lake." "Oh, God!" Maxie, who'd been walking up ahead, now turned and walked backwards a few steps. "Really?" She couldn't help it. Her pretty red lips curled upward in a smile. "Look at her," Wendy said, shaking her head. "Now she's interested? Listen, Maxie, let me tell you something right now so we have it on record, and there's no mistake about it later. I'm not going to that carnival. Not in a million years, okay? So don't waste your breath, girlfriend." Maxie laughed. "I just said we weren't going." "I know, but I could tell what you were thinking. You were thinking we were going." "No way," Maxie said. "It's going to be the B word." "Beautiful?" guessed Casey, who loved this game but was never any good at it. "Boring," Maxie said. "Besides, I'm sure we can find something better to do on a Friday night." Maxie made an obscene gesture to indicate something better to do on a Friday night. "I agree 1,000,000%, Wendy said, visibly relieved. "A carnival is the last thing we ought to do." Both Wendy and Casey were 16, 1 year younger than Maxie. They were only in the same class before Maxie had gotten kicked out of the school for smoking dope in the bathroom in the 9th grade. Though she was only 1 year older than her friends, most of the time it felt more like 10 years. "Look at you," Maxie told Wendy. She clicked her tongue. "You're such a coward." "That's right, but I'm an alive coward, and I'd like to live to be an old coward someday." Maxie shook her head. Most kids in Holloway were scared witless at the mere mention of Crystal Lake. Not Maxie. She loved living so close to the famous town. Crystal Lake, murder capital of the world. A number of years ago, a boy named Jason Voorhees had drowned in the lake because of the carelessness of some camp counselors. Ever since then, the place had been cursed. Every horrible thing that could happen, from a hunting accident to a maniac going on a wild killing spree, happened in Crystal Lake. Out for revenge for her son's death, Jason's crazy mom had been the first killer, but folks believed that it was Jason himself who caused the rest of the trouble. They said that the dead boy kept coming back from the grave. They said that Jason was all grown now, that he wore a white hockey mask to hide his rotted face. They said Jason wanted revenge. All pretty silly as far as Maxie was concerned. But when things got really tedious around Holloway, which was pretty much all the time, she liked to go sightseeing, as she called it, around the infamous lake. To tell the truth, there was nothing to see besides some old run-down cabins, but afterwards, whenever she told her mom where she'd been, Mrs. Wagner had a hissy fit, and then her mom would tell her dad, who wouldn't do a thing. The mere thought of her father released a bitter bile in Maxie's stomach. It literally gave her a bad taste in her mouth, and she hawked and spat. "Gross!" Casey cried. "Maxie!" "Hey, you know what Jesse Kramer told me about Crystal Lake?" Maxie asked. "I don't want to hear it," Wendy said. "He heard it's like the Devil's Gateway. that if you dig down deep enough, anywhere around there, this invisible vapor starts seeping up and out of the ground. Maxie waggled her fingers to indicate fumes. The vapor turns you meaner and nastier the longer you breathe it in. And if... Okay, Casey pleaded. That's enough. I'm getting the willies. There's more, Maxie said happily. Billy Robbins says that Jason's mask is buried somewhere around Crystal Lake, and whoever puts it on... Instead of finishing her sentence, Maxie suddenly turned her face into a mask of rage and whirled on Wendy and KC. Both girls shrieked. Wendy dodged out into the road. A passing car honked, her back to the curb as it screamed by. Maxie laughed. She was strolling past another telephone pole and another carnival poster. She reached out one long arm and ripped the poster down without breaking stride. Maxie, Casey said, shocked. Someone went to a lot of trouble to put that up. Maxie snorted. Wendy was frowning, her red eyebrows knitted together. If you're taking that thing because you think we're going to the carnival, she said, I swear to you, Maxie, I'm not playing. I just like the colors, Maxie interrupted. She wasn't even looking at the poster in her hands. She flapped it against her thigh as she walked. Wendy was sweating heavily now from the fast pace that they were setting. She looked up at Maxie, who grinned and slapped the poster down on her head. The S word, Maxie said. Silly? Guessed Casey. Scaredy cat. I'm not going, Wendy repeated grimly. Maxie only nodded. Chapter 3. Backbreaking. There were over 40 men and women traveling with Vince Fantana's carnival. The workers were divided into 3 basic groups. 1. Concessionaires. These were the people who ran the games and sold the balloons and other junk. 2. Food. This meant the people who sold the caramel corn and the candy apples and the frozen bananas and everything else the kids puked up on the roller coaster. And 3. Rides. Mitch was in the rides group. But during setup, it didn't matter what group you were in. Everyone was in the backbreaking group. To set up the biggest rides, such as the Monster, they used the big crane. But the smaller rides and the kiddie rides were put together using only the muscle power of the crew. As if they weren't working hard enough already, the carnies had to dig deep foundations for some of the bigger rides, and they had to drill post holes for the cyclone fence. The fence encircled the entire fairgrounds. That way, everyone who came to the fair had to come through the entrance gate and pay their $5 entrance fee. Then they could purchase their ride tickets. Fence or no fence, there were usually loads of kids who climbed over each night and got in for free. But this time, Vince wasn't kidding around. He'd gotten one of those electric fences that farmers use to keep their cattle from wandering off their land. And any kid who tried to get a free admission was going to get a free zap. All week, Vince kept pushing everyone hard. This weekend was the July 4th blowout, he constantly reminded them. He was counting on a big turnout, and he desperately needed the fair to be ready. So all week, the woods of Crystal Lake resounded with sawing, banging, hammering, shouting, cursing, and it was a strange thing. The longer they spent at Crystal Lake, the nastier the carny workers became. It was like there was something in the air around there, thought Mitch. The weather sure seemed nasty, with the humidity that clung to your skin like some evil creature's hot breath. Mitch found he was sweating hard even when he was standing still. But despite the heat and all the bickering, the crew still finished setting up the fair by late Thursday night, right on schedule. As most of the carnies headed for bed, Mitch strode through the fairgrounds. All the rides and booths were now in place. The trees were strung with lights, and Vince had the honky-tonk organ grinder, Muzak, going to get everyone in the mood. Mitch had to admit it. The place was starting to look pretty good. Now all they needed were some customers and some pretty teenage girls from Mitch. Then they'd be ready to rock and roll. Chapter 4. Go Fetch. When the phone rang on Thursday night, Maxie didn't move. Naked, she was sitting on the edge of her bed, pressing a cold can of beer against her forehead. Without putting the beer down, she bent to pick up the receiver. "Yeah," a familiar voice said. Just a second. Then there was all this rustling, followed by clicking sounds and static. And then the Pearl Jam song, Go, started blasting over the line. "Maxie?" "Yeah." "You hear the music?" "Uh-huh." She was practically shouting. "Good. This is Greg, by the way." "I know." Greg Dillon was a senior from the nearby town of Hawthorne who was enrolled in Maxie's summer school. The guy had been mad about her since the first week of classes. He was always pulling these crazy, romantic stunts, like playing his electric guitar right outside her window at her parents' house late one night and crooning his own rendition of the reggae hit Maxie. The only trouble was it wasn't Maxie's window. It was her parents' window. Her father was not amused, which was the first thing that had really endeared Greg to Maxie. She had grown even fonder of him over the last month. She was sorry she didn't feel something more. Not only was the guy a real sweetheart, he was also a sad case. His parents had both died in a car crash the day after his 13th birthday. "So listen," yelled Greg. "You want to know why I'm playing this music? See, I have this theory. Did you ever—" "Greg, wait, just let me finish." "Okay, but could you turn the music down a little? I'm having a kind of a hard time hearing what you're—" "Oh, yeah, hold on. There, is that better? Anyway, did you ever think about why movies are always so romantic? I've got it figured. It's because the music. See, whenever anyone in the movie says something romantic, it sounds great because there's still all this music behind it. But in real life, if you say the same things, you sound like a dork. Am I right? Of course I'm right." "So you're doing your own soundtrack?" Maxie asked. "Right. Oh, hey, by the way, am I calling you too late?" Maxie glanced at the clock. It was after midnight. "Yeah, you are. But it's too hot to sleep, so you're okay." "Oh, good." So, how are you? I mean, I haven't seen you in like hours." "I'm fine. I think I'm sweating to death is all." Greg laughed some more. Maxie popped the top on the beer and took a swig. "Okay," Greg said. "So here's what I called to talk to you about." Excuse me." He cleared his throat several times. You see, there's a carnival in town," he said at last. He was losing his voice. Maxie glanced around her dorm room. It was a small single with dark wainscoting that went halfway up the walls. The rest of the walls were bare plaster, which was painted an ugly, institutional yellow. Unlike Casey and Wendy, Maxie had insisted that her dad foot the bill for her to stay on campus this summer so she could get away from her house, which made her insane. But even though she had spent as much time as possible in her dorm, she had done nothing to decorate the room. There were no curtains and no posters until now. The ripped carnival poster was thumbtacked right into the plaster, against dorm rules, in the center of the room. "Yeah, I know about the carnival," Maxie said gently. She also knew where this was all leading now, and wished she could lead him off, or head him off, or at least find some way to let him down gently. "Greg, and, hold on, I was wondering if maybe—" "Greg, listen. Would you go with me, Maxie?" Maxie sighed. When?" Greg seemed to be getting more and more nervous as he went along. Tonight? I mean, what am I saying? Tomorrow night. Maxie frowned. "Greg, I'd really love to go, but the thing is, I promised my girlfriends we'd—" She stopped short. If she told him about the party at Jeff McGuinn's tomorrow night, he'd invite himself, or just show up. "I can't," she said. "Sorry." Even over the phone, Maxie could feel Greg's intense disappointment. It made her hot skin prickle. Most of the time, she walked around with the feeling of disappointment as hard as a rock. The thought of disappointing someone else made her feel even worse. Okay, sure," he said dejectedly. Yeah, maybe some other time or something. Whatever. Maxie bit her lip. Yeah, definitely, she lied. She stretched out on the bed. The pillow was damp with her sweat. Listen, Greg? Uh-huh. She paused, wondering if what she was about to say would help Greg or only make things worse. She couldn't decide. The hell with it. Can I say something here? She said abruptly. Greg, give up on me, okay? Now the silence on the other end was electric. I'm not worth it. For one thing, I'm sad pretty much all the time. I'm like this big downer, and I couldn't even tell you why. That was another lie. She knew what she was down about, the P word, her parents. But she wasn't about to get into that now. She rushed on. I get so down that I'm mean to everybody, even my best friends, just as a way of passing time. You know what I mean? There was no response. Hello? They've got... Listen, Maxie, they've got the largest traveling roller coaster in the world, Greg said, and there's going to be fireworks. Yeah, well, whoop-de-doo, Maxie said. She was sorry she said that, right after she said it. But then, of course, it was too late. She sat up again. See what I mean? I'm a lousy person. I swear to you. Anyway, I probably should get off because I thought you were such a daredevil, though, Greg said slyly. Don't tell me you're afraid of a little excitement. What? You're scared of a few rides? Maxie laughed, as Greg knew Maxie loved and craved thrills and chills. Like the time she was playing Truth or Dare, her favorite game, with Casey, Wendy, and a bunch of guys, and somebody dared Maxie to drive into town blindfolded. She did it, of course. Not all the way into town. She totaled her shiny new Lexus, a birthday present from dear Daddy, about halfway down the block, smashing it into an oak tree. That was the maddest she'd ever seen her dad. It was wonderful. Anyway, compared to stunts like that, a carnival seemed like so much kiddie shit. Way too safe to be exciting. I haven't been to a carnival since my mom and dad took me, Greg said. I've always promised myself that I'd go back and... He trailed off. Maxie couldn't think of anything to say. Greg had never talked to her about losing his parents, and she had never asked. She was suddenly terrified he was going to start crying and spilling his guts out. Look, Greg, I guess I better... Okay, he cut her off. I'm going to ask you one more time, and that's it. Will you go with me? Maxie tried to make her deep voice sound as kind and light as she could. I told you, I'm committed. Which was true. Besides, the party was going to be awesome. Jeff's parents were going away on vacation. They'd have the whole house to themselves. Well, Greg said grimly, I'm going to the carnival. Though gestures were wasted in phone conversations, Maxie shrugged. Suit yourself. It came out colder than she had intended. After she hung up, she felt even lower than before, because now she figured she had gotten Greg as depressed as she was. Maybe she should bag the party and go to the carnival. At least that way somebody would be happy. After all, it was just one date. One date wouldn't kill her. Mitch sat on the steps of his trailer trying to cool off and unwind. His ripped black Fantana's Funhouse t-shirt was drenched with sweat. He had a bottle of beer in his hand. It was his fifth. He opened it, spat the top into the grass, and took an endless swig. He watched cross-eyed as the amber liquid foamed and bucked, struggling to get out of the bottle and down his gullet. Mitch had parked his van in the first clearing, the one that was ringed with the horseshoe of cabins, right at the entrance to the old Crystal Lake campsite. He wasn't the only one who had chosen this spot. The field was filled with vans, and some of the carnies were bunking down in the cabins themselves. It was after 1 a.m. There wasn't a sound except for the creepers and the peepers chirping in the woods. There wasn't any light except for the ravaged face of the old moon, staring down. Probably everyone in the carnival was asleep except for Mitch, and maybe except for... He whistled. There was a rustling in the brush as Stump bounded out of the darkness. Stump was a big dog. built almost like a butcher block table. The dog ran straight at him. Snarling, he leaped at Mitch's throat. Mitch knocked the dog's head to the side with the back of his arm. Stump closed his sharp white teeth around his forearm, biting a little harder than he usually did when they played. Mitch swore, yanking his arm away. Even Stump was in a bad mood, he thought, which was kind of a scary thing. The dog's jaws were so powerful, he could tear a man's guts out without breaking a sweat. He found a stick on the ground and held it up for the dog to see. Stump bared his teeth as if the stick were his mortal enemy. He lunged. Mitch stood fast, raising the stick up high before Stump could get it. But Stump leaped straight off the ground. Mitch swung the stick away from the dog's snapping jaws. Then he turned and threw the stick as hard as he could. It landed right in front of the center cabin. Stump turned around to chase the stick, turning so hard he fell. He scrambled back to his feet and raced off into the darkness. Go fetch, thought Mitch sourly. Then he tossed his empty beer bottle into the grass and went inside. He had a little trouble taking off his t-shirt, so he just ripped it off his body instead. He flopped down on the narrow bed, but he didn't feel like sleeping. He was feeling that bored feeling again, the one that could only be calmed by the company of pretty young girls. Or by... He got up and sat down at the tiny fold-down Formica kitchen table. He took a switchblade with a glossy red handle out of his back pocket. He popped open the sharp, shiny knife. Then he placed his right hand down on the table, carefully spreading the fingers as wide as they would go. He started poking the point of the blade in the spaces between his fingers, moving left to right and back again, faster and faster, until the knife point made a satisfying clickety-click sound, like the carnival's big spinning wheels of chance, where people lost hundreds of dollars trying to win stuffed dolls that cost Fantana $5 apiece. Mitch had been doing this knife trick for years and had never cut himself. But it was dark in the van and he had to strain to see his fingers. Across the backs of his fingers, green tattooed letters spelled out, I dare you. Mitch could never resist a dare, even for himself. He went faster. And when he dared himself to try an even harder stunt, he dared himself to close his eyes, just for an instant. When he opened his eyes again, the knife was sticking out of the A in dare. He swore. Then he pulled the blade out and got up to look for his first aid kit. And after he managed to stop the bleeding and get the finger bandaged, he went back to doing the knife trick again. He grinned slyly. This time he got the knife all the way across his hand with his eyes closed. It was only then that he remembered Stump. He went outside and stood on the steps of the van whistling softly. The dog did not come. Then Mitch saw the pile of dirt. In front of the center cabin where he had thrown the stick, there was a large pile of black earth, and little clouds of dirt kept flying up out of the ground, adding to the pile. What was Stump into now? Mitch started down the steps. He didn't get far because just then he heard the dog's padding footsteps. The dog's sleek black and brown coat hid it in the shadows. He didn't see it until it was almost upon him. Mitch tensed, stepping backward. Perhaps sensing the man's fear, Stump stopped short as well, only a few yards away. Stump was staring up at his master, his large brown eyes gleaming. Hanging from the dog's mouth was what appeared to be a white mask, like the kind hockey goalies wore. Mitch didn't know why, but the sight of the mask made his blood start to pound. It was as if he could see the thick red liquid inside his own body, see it pumping in and out of his heart and flooding his chest. The dog's eyes stayed locked on Mitch's for a moment. Then he trotted forward and dropped the mask at his master's feet. Okay, this has been chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 of Friday the 13th The Carnival, book number 3 in the Crystal Lake series by Eric Morse, a.k.a. William Pattison. Thank you so much, Eric Morse, for this breath of fresh air, this book, because I've been trying to do Jason X Death Moon, and it was driving me crazy. Like, I just didn't want to do it. But I'm going to finish that book, I promise. But I'm so glad to move on to this book. I really enjoy this series, and I can't wait to see where this story goes. Yeah, guys, let me know what you think of this story so far. And maybe some of you have read this whenever you were younger or something like that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And if you haven't, what your thoughts are going into this new book, what your expectations are, and things like that. I really enjoyed the fact that in the last book, Jason's Curse, the last book in the series, that the guy who found the mask and got possessed was very lovable, you could sympathize with him and everything like that. But in this book, it's interesting that we're getting like the polar opposite. We got a guy that kind of sounds like a scumbag. He's driving around in his van reading Hustler. He's in his late 20s and he's wanting to hook up with teenage girls. I mean, I'm not really sympathizing with this guy so far, but it's going to be interesting how somebody with that mindset, how easily they're going to be controlled by the spirit of Jason once they put the mask on, and how they're going to handle that transformation. So yeah, guys, I'm looking forward to it. I'm actually looking forward to the next upload. Yay, I'm back to feeling like that again. So I'll be back very soon with more of Friday the 13th The Carnival by Eric Morse. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and I'll see you at the carnival.